Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 312 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm your host, Danièle Cybulskie. If you were to ask random people on the street to name one event that happened in the Middle Ages, it wouldn't be long before someone mentioned the 100 Years' War, or at least one of its legendary battles. Although a lot of medieval history is murky, the whys and wherefores, not to mention the timeline of the 100 Years' War, are firmly nailed down. Or are they? This week, I spoke with Dr. Michael Livingston about why the 100 Years' War should actually be called the 200 Years' War. He's a prolific author of both scholarly works and fictional works, and a Citadel Distinguished Professor at the Citadel, and I never know if I should call him Doctor, Professor, or Colonel, so I just call him Michael. You may know him from his books Agincourt, Battle of the Scarred King, and Crécy, Battle of Five Kings, or his documentaries on History Hit, including his new series on rebels. Podcast junkies will know him from Bow and Blade, which he co-hosts with Kelly DeVries, or from past episodes of this podcast. One of Mike's several new books, and the one we'll be discussing today, is Bloody Crowns, A New History of the 100 Years' War. Our conversation on what Michael thinks actually touched off the conflict, when it ended, and why we should question everything is coming up right after this. Well, welcome back, Michael. It's so great to see you. It's been years, so this is just a treat for me to see you again. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Very pleased to be here. But yeah, it's been a couple of years since we caught up.
Yeah, so it's about time. Okay, so you've written this big book on what you're now calling the 200 Years' War. You have a rep in our field for redefining things, battlefield sites, all that. So I need to ask you this question. Do you think you're the biggest troublemaker in medieval studies today?
No. No. Yeah, maybe. Look, so here's the thing. I don't mean to stir things up. Like, that's not, it's not like I wake up in the morning and like, well, whose Cheerios can I like meddle with today? But like, if you're going to go to the trouble of writing a book, you should have something new to say. So I've been sometimes accused of like, well, you just want to relocate all the battles. I don't. And there's been plenty of battles that I've been asked to study and to examine. And you're like, no, that's where it happened. I don't write that. like what even is that? Like, oh, that thing we thought was true is true. That's not a book. So yeah, it's the ones where you look at it and you say, yeah, it needs to be fixed. It needs to be changed. That's what I tend to write. And so yeah, I guess I have a reputation of that. Is that okay?
Maybe in my own brain. No, I just had to tease you. I just had to tease you about it because this is something that you have done before is reevaluate things from the beginning. And actually, I think this is a responsible thing to do. One of the things that people may or may not know about you is you're really dedicated to going back to original sources rather than going from translations. And this type of work is what leads you in new directions. And so I actually really respect what you do, but I have to give you trouble about it because we've known each other a long time.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that. Yeah, it is what kind of drew me to even my career path. In the degrees that I got and the study I did was all to enable that getting to the primary source to the point of like, can I read them? I need to be able to read the original manuscript. Not just the original language. I need to have that kind of raw data to really think anew and think fresh on things. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, so let's get into this. So this book is looking at the 100 Years' War again, and you're suggesting that maybe it's 200 years, about 1292 to 1492. But let's start with what we quote unquote already know.
Yeah.
What is the traditional starting point for the 100 Years' War?
Traditional, you tend to start it in the year 1337, and then it ends in 1453, which is 116 years. The label 100 Years' War, which is a lot easier to say than 116. So, that's good. That's a label that doesn't even exist until 1823. So that's 370 years after the war supposedly concludes. Somebody comes up with this title and everybody's just kind of gone with it, and then started I think kind of making historical arguments based on that periodization. And I don't know that that's really a clever thing to do. I think it's actually worthwhile to say, do those dates make sense? And if they don't, what does make sense? And what does that tell us about how things developed? The 1337 date is really about Edward III being sort of told that he can no longer be in charge of Gascony, of Aquitaine Gascony, whatever you want to call it. That's forfeit to the French crown because he was supposed to pay homage as essentially a vassal of the King of France. And 1453 is the Battle of Castillon. So, after the Battle of Castillon, the English are kind of kicked out, more or less, of Gascony. That's pretty much it. So, all right, I guess this is like a war sort of about the status of Gascony. I guess that's what we're going to put that together as. But that's not when that struggle ended or began, honestly. So, when I started thinking about this book, pretty quickly that problem presented itself. Like, well, where do you start this story? And what even is this story? And that's kind of what led me to going out on a limb and saying, well, the dates are wrong. And we need to redefine the dates and therefore redefine the war.
Right. Well, maybe we should go back even further, because when we're talking about Gascony, we're talking about Aquitaine. Why is there beef over this to begin with? How did this become a continental possession of the English in the first place? Maybe we should make that clear before we go any further.
So the English had holdings on the continent back to 1066, right? When William the Conqueror comes over and becomes King of England, he's still the Duke of Normandy in France. So in those French holdings, he's actually underneath the French king. So from as far back as 1066, you've got a problem where a king of England is king in his own realm, but part of his lands, he's subject to another king. That's really just untenable. And from 1066 on, you've got various phases of this struggle. There is an earlier Hundred Years' War, as it were, which is all about Henry and Eleanor of Aquitaine and all that goodness, which is an absolutely amazing period, as you well know, absolutely amazing period that expands greatly the English lands in France, the Angevin Empire, it's often called, because it brings in Eleanor of Aquitaine's enormous holdings in France. So at a certain point there, the English lands in France are like probably larger than the lands of the King of France in France. And that's a problem for the French king. He don't like that. So you have a kind of long struggle that unfolds from that. That's like my whole introduction. It's a really long introduction to the book that is sort of talking about the wars before the war and all of this struggle that ends up with the Treaty of Paris, which theoretically solved all the problems. And it solved it all by kind of codifying what the arrangement was. As long as everybody follows the rules, everybody's going to be fine. But like, not everybody wanted to follow the rules, because one of the rules is that, in a medieval sense, you have to pay homage to your lord. And if the French king said you have to pay homage for your lands in France, you had to do it. Like that was the deal. And some kings didn't want to do that. Some kings didn't really. The French king was like, yeah, I get it. And so you don't have to really do it. But there were some hotheads. And really the 200 Years' War is sort of that on a very grand scale over generations. How are you going to make this work? I mean, in the end, of course, you can't make it work. I mean, that's, this is never going to work. It's just how are we going to get out of the situation? And it's extremely bloody. 200 years of trying to get out of the situation is what it is.
Okay, so there is a moment where everyone's like, there is a status quo. There's a bunch of pieces of what used to be like Charlemagne's empire, but is now under the control of England, under the umbrella control of the King of France. Then you really pin the beginning of this war, if we're calling it a 200 Years' War, you pin the beginning of this on someone who I am now very familiar with, and that is Philip the Fair. He shoulders a lot of blame for a lot of things. Tell us what happens. Enter Philip the Fair.
Yeah, Philip, man, amazing guy.
What a guy.
What a guy. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near him, but what a guy. Somebody who made a mark in history, that's for sure.
That's for sure, yes.
That's for sure. So I pinned the start to 1292, and in particular to a murder that most people don't know about. A murder of an unnamed, we don't know the guy's name. We're not even sure where he was from. But a murder takes place on a secluded island out in the Atlantic that causes a sort of tit for tat repercussions, like, oh, you killed somebody, we're going to kill somebody. You killed somebody, we're going to kill somebody. And it escalates very, very quickly. It's often called a pirate war because the people who are doing this, the kings of England and France, which is Edward I at this point, and Philippe, are saying, like, we have nothing to do with it. Clearly, popularly, the chroniclers, they don't believe that. They're like, the English chroniclers are like, Philippe is behind all this. The French writers are like, Edward's behind all this. So, I mean, I don't think either man really is, but there's clearly a sense that they could be, and everybody is willing to believe that. And Philippe takes this moment to say, we're kicking the English out. That's it. We're done. Get them out. And Edward is really caught off foot by this. And ultimately, they're able to reestablish the status quo. But this is coming at a very difficult time. I mean, you got William Wallace is rising up in 1297 in Scotland. So Edward's got that to deal with up there. Edward is trying to use the Low Countries, Flanders, to try and get some leverage over the French. And Philippe, being Philippe, is trying to sort of like leverage that right back and take more control, because Philippe is very interested in like centralizing, control within the realm for good reason. He's interested in doing that. So you have these extremely hard-headed leaders. Edward I is not like a softie. I don't know if anybody needs that pointed out. Like Edward I is like, wow, what a cuddlebug. Edward is not, and Philippe is 100% not. And they both sort of recognize, we have an opportunity to settle this, and they want to settle it on their terms, of course. And that's what really kind of launches us into this 200 years war, because they have planted the seeds and made the first steps of, we're not going to be okay with this arrangement that the Treaty of Paris and a couple decades earlier, coming out of the Angevin Empire, like the Treaty of Paris had set these terms. We're not okay with it. And in particular, the French were not okay with it. They weren't going to be happy until they had reestablished, in their mind, ancestral France. It's the memory of Charlemagne and Clovis. This is what France is supposed to be. And that means the English got to go, not just be here and be convinced to bow the knee. Like, no, like, you out. And they're not going to really rest until that happens.
Yeah, I think that Philip would have taken any excuse to go for Gascony. The pirate war just seems to be a good one. So he's like, this is my time. That goes badly. But anyway.
Well, yeah.
So then their children marry. So we got Edward II, we got Isabella of France. And then they have the king who's going to be Edward III. Yep. Right. So this is bringing us into the 1330s, so that when we come to 1337, the French king is like, I'm going to take Gascony from you. But then there is a discussion about the actual crown of France. So tell us how this goes.
Yeah, this never should have happened.
Yes.
It never should have happened. When the king of France decides to marry his daughter to the future king of England, she's got older brothers. And they're all young enough that nobody has it in the cards that this could possibly screw up the passing on of the crown. But it actually turns out all of her older brothers bite it. And they bite it pretty young. And they bite it without a male heir. There are female heirs, but there are no male heirs. And before England even gets involved, France had already started playing this game of saying that women could not inherit the throne. So they'd done that to disinherit some kids, which was a jerk move, but whatever. Mm-hmm. They did that. Mm-hmm. The so-called Salic law. Having established that, now they're like out of heirs. Like they got, well shoot. And Oops. So the question of what happens now, because Isabella would be the next one, like she's the next one up. And well, that's not going to happen because she's a woman. Mm-hmm. And she's the Queen of England. That's not going to happen. So who's going to be our next male heir? And at that point, it's debatable. There's at least three dudes who can make this claim. One is Edward III. He's like, I am the direct descendant of direct descendant of direct descendant, straight up, I'm good to go. And yeah, the claims coming through my mom, and she's one, but she's not getting the lands I am. So like, checks out.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly, the French nobility is not super keen on the King of France now being the King of England. They're like, we're pretty sure that's not going to work. There's also the King of Navarre, Charles the Bad, actually has a totally legitimate claim. And he tries to push it. There's a good reason he's known as Charles the Bad to historians. Nobody's seriously keen on him being it. What they actually end up doing is they go back a generation and then move sideways to a cadet line. And that's how we get Philippe VI. And actually, it's not like Edward III cries foul. He doesn't. It's like, well, okay, that's legit. He just wants what he wants. And when he starts not getting what he wants and starts needing his allies in the Low Countries and in Flanders and that part of the world, today's Belgium and Netherlands, when he's got allies in the Low Countries who want to help him because he's trying to defend the wool trade, among other things, which is their riches are based on, but they can't go against their oaths of fealty to the King of France. Well, here's an idea. How about if I, Edward, claim to be the King of France? You'd be holding true to your oaths by helping me. And I do have a claim. I mean, I haven't pushed it yet, but I do have a claim. So this is just like political convenience. It becomes much bigger than that because the English start feeling like, hey, really, actually, I like this idea of we should be king. And especially after the Battle of Crécy, where Edward has so thoroughly defeated Philippe, this becomes a far more kind of legitimate or legitimized, I suppose. It was always legitimate, a legitimized claim that the English king is the proper king of France through Edward, through his mother. So yeah, it's a weirdly complicated thing. When I learned it as a kid, it wasn't complicated.
That's so true about like everything medieval though, right?
Right. You're like, oh, and then like this guy claimed the throne, well, yeah, but also, no, like it was economic. It was all these sort of other things that were happening. And again, it's not like he immediately made that claim. He only made that claim when it was like otherwise needed to make that claim. And of course, what happens, this massive, massive conflict, isn't what he intended. But I mean, in his lifetime, it went very well for a bit and then went very badly. And then under his heirs, the same kind of thing. So the whole idea that the 100 Years' War, as it's normally defined, is about the crown of France is one of those things that kind of fell by the wayside to me because, well, the conflict wasn't about that. That was a move. That was a thing that happens as part of the conflict, but it wasn't about that. Not in the beginning and not in the end. Because if you say, well, the 100 Years' War was about the English claim to the throne of France and it ends in 1453. No, it didn't. Nothing ended in 1450. A battle was lost, but nobody declared anything ended. The English continued, technically, to claim the throne of France until George III. The French Revolution had happened. There is no crown of France. And the English were still like,
hey, wait.
Yeah, like, so come on. It's not about that. This is a war about France defining itself, defining its borders, and defining its own authority within those borders, which is, not something most people have thought about. And I think I hope is kind of an advantage that I'm an American. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not trying to toe an English line or a French line. I'm just calling balls and strikes as they're coming in as best I can.
Yeah. On the other side of the border here, I'm like English and French all rolled into one. So, it's hard to pick a dog in this fight as a Canadian as well. Makes it easy for me, right? Or
easy.
difficult?
Easy peasy.
Right. So this begs the question, why did you pick the endpoint that you picked? So maybe what's the traditional endpoint? And then why do people say this is the traditional endpoint? And then why did you pick 1492 if there's still discussion happening later?
Yeah, so 1453 is the usual, and that's the Battle of Castillon, which is kind of like the last military gasp of the English in Gascony. Depending on your exact date of the year, it could also be the expulsion of the English administrators from Bordeaux. But like that year is just like, that's kind of like the English get kicked out of Gascony. And that has some sensibility to it. If this is a war about control of Gascony and that alone, then maybe that kind of works. Your beginning date wouldn't work. That traditional beginning date wouldn't work. But the end date, I guess that could end that. The problem with stopping it there, though, is again, nothing has been resolved. Nobody on the English side has said, oh, well, forget it, we're done. And nobody on the French side is thinking, oh, well, it's finished. I mean, this is an undeclared war. There was no declaration of war. This is just something that metastasizes. And the ending is similarly undefined because, again, there wasn't a thing in the beginning. So, like, what ends it, where you end it, for my part, I felt like it was important. If I'm going to structure this around France and control of itself, then, but when is that really done? And when that is really done is you've got Brittany brought into the fold, kind of formally and finally done, Normandy, Gascony, Aquitaine. When do we get that sort of entity more or less cohesive and the crown cohesive and the French monarchy moved into now this, as a medievalist, I would say modern concept because, after the printing press, everything's journalism. So when you get that move into this kind of new phase of the French monarchy, and 1492 is smack dab, when you look at the treaties and all of that, and you get the treaty with England that is basically, yeah, we agree, the English agree, you've got all this stuff. And we're not fighting for it. We're not going to fight you in Brittany. We're not going to fight you, when that is done, it's done. Yeah, the English still have a sort of, our coat of arms is still quartered and all that stuff, but nobody's seriously making a play for it. At the end of the book, I actually introduced my conclusion with the Field of the Cloth of Gold and Henry the Eighth meeting with the French king. And when they're being introduced, Harold says, King of England and France. And Henry laughs about it, and I was like, don't worry, man. That's just something that we say. Don't worry. It's not happening. It means nothing is what he says. It means nothing. So it's done. The war is done. So yeah, I felt like 1492 was the most sensible cutoff, given what I was seeing held it together in the first place. I also felt how perfect that was to end it. This Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this struggle goes, right? England and France are both defined in what they are. And what are they going to be now, right? And then here they come to our shores. And this is where they fight it. And yeah, in Canada, I mean, to some degree, it's still happening. It's still happening. So the imperial movement and colonialism and all that, I mean, I think that grows straight out of this, right? England is not in France anymore. Well, where is it going to be? It's got to go somewhere else. And France is going to counter those claims wherever they're found. So I think for a lot of reasons, it made sense to kind of lock it down there. And I tried to be as transparent as I could be on why that is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're going to make a big claim, you got to lay out the evidence, which is something that you do. And it's making me remember when we're talking about sort of moving into the early modern period that even today, the license plates from Quebec say Je me souviens, which means I remember. It's just like these things, they're never over. They're never completely done. It goes way, way, way back.
Yeah. Yeah. People don't let go. Yeah. 1492, it's called the Peace of Étape, which is signed on the 3rd of November. And that's like the English are just like, yeah, we're done. We're not going to do anything more on the continent. Not like this. They still hold a couple Channel Islands and things like that. And the struggle over Calais, of course, is gonna move forward. But it's not these territorial claims that have been pushed. All of that's just done. So I thought it made sense to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so much of this is about shifting identities. And when you decide that, like, this is England, this is France, we are English, we are French. And this changes from the place that you're at, the year that we're talking about is just in constant flux. And so I've been talking with our friend Dan Jones about Charles VI's reign. And he was talking about Henry V at one point and says, France is unwinnable unless you have more of the French on your side. If you just come from just England, you're never going to win it. And in the end, they sort of reestablished themselves in a way that they had well before any of this started.
That's absolutely right. I mean, Henry V gets close to pulling it off.
Yeah, ish.
And Bedford did his best. I mean, Bedford would have been,
Hmm.
I think, a great king of England. But I don't think Henry could have actually done it. I mean, I really don't. I think Henry, Dan would probably get mad at me for saying this. Henry, extraordinary figure, but also really lucky to die when he did, in the
Hmm.
sense that that enabled the myth of him to be kind of put in stone at this moment so that he didn't have to oversee what probably would have been a gradual pullback, so that people could just keep imagining that he was this unbeatable guy. Well, dying when you're unbeaten is a good way to accomplish that. So yeah, it never really could have worked. And yeah, spoiler alert, France wins. Uh, doesn't matter how you define this thing, France wins.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's funny is you actually kind of boldly say in your book, like, France started this and they do finish it, but they started it, which is a bold claim, which is something I think you're going to have lots of arguments over beer over many years after this book, but they do finish it. Yeah.
Yeah, they finish it and they finish it in a hurry. Yeah, well, I mean, France, what is it, right? You got to define what it is. So by my definition of what it is, France started it. But yeah, if you want to take an Anglo-centric view and sort of build a different periodization, I suppose you could say, yeah, England started it at that point. I don't think that would make any sense, but but hey, write your own book, go for it.
That's right. That's right. People are going to come for our scholarship, then they got to write their own books and tell us how it is, right? Okay, so there are a few things that are overarching themes within the book as well. So we've laid out the history, we've laid out sort of a struggle for the crown as much as we want to forefront that or not. There are a few things that really change over this time. And I think when you put the dates like even further apart, 1292, 1492, these become even more clear. And one of those things is standing armies. So tell us a little bit about how armies change over this course and because of this war.
Absolutely. This really is the birth of armies as we know of them, happens in this period. I mean, yeah, as you just said, when you think about from 1292 to 1492, like the changes that happen here, socially, culturally, philosophically, religiously, but militarily, right? This is gunpowder. Like gunpowder shows up in the middle of this thing, and that changes things drastically. We have to end up building the infrastructure in France to have a standing army, which isn't simple. That requires a lot of change when you had a social system that was built on lords having their own individual people that they can bring, and you're sort of negotiating who's going to bring what and all. It's very different for the king to say, well, just give it all to me and I'll take all the power, thank you. And I've got
Mhm.
the army, and it becomes this state supported thing. And there are small civil wars in France over that issue because the lords don't like that.
Mhm.
And they don't like that loss of power and control. The French king wins all that. And again, all that is basically sorted by 1492, which is part of this. Like now you have France as we conceive of it. But it's not just the building of standing armies that is, I think fascinating, but also the building of modern, quote unquote, modern taxation practices and administration, because that's what you need, right? Getting the men isn't typically the problem in a war. It's the materiel and the money. That's what costs. And so to do this, well, we're going to have a standing army. I got to have a standing pay system for those guys. I have to have a standing system of manufacturing arms, the paying for that, a standing system of transport and logistics, a standing administration system, keep track of all this. It's the construction of the modern state as we know it, really, that happens at the end of this. And because this is what was needed to just finally get the English out and keep them out. You had to do this. And they did it. I mean, the French did it and it's successful. But it really, it's the kind of thing that I don't think you usually think about when you think about the Hundred Years' War. You don't think about how this is changing our landscapes of culture. And I mean, nationalism, you can make a very good argument is this is really the birth of that even. again, in the middle of all this, you get sort of this nationalizing sense of self, identifying on national scales. And to have all of that with all these amazing characters. I mean, Henry V is an awesome character. Edward III's an awesome character. Philippe is an amazing character. Joan of Arc.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, come on, it's Joan of Arc. Like, oh my God, that was a tough bit of the book to write.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you have all these amazing characters and all these absolutely world-changing things that are happening. And then the outcome of them, I think, is so world-changing. Again, this really pushes the age of discovery into motion. Even if you say, well, the age of discovery is really kind of begun with Portugal and, Prince Henry the Navigator and all that. Well, that's only in a position to happen because of John of Gaunt and everything he had done on the Iberian Peninsula, because that has stymied any attempt they have to go into the continent. So Prince Henry the Navigator goes out and goes in the Atlantic. All of this stuff is an outcome of this conflict. I think I say at the beginning of the book, when I'm setting it up, this impacts so much across the world in the end that it would be really weird to sort of say it was about the control of, English administrators in Gascony. That'd be like a really weird thing. But when you take a bigger scope of it, I think it really does make a lot of sense, and it fits together. At least I hope it does. It made sense in my head. So there.
Well, one of the things that I liked about this book is that you extend a little bit further from these two nations, because, the older I get, the more I research, the more I think that like Flanders, the Low Countries, are just at the heart of so much history, not to mention the Iberian kingdoms. And so you've pulled them in here. Why did you need to have them in here, considering that you already had like a mammoth task in front of you to explain 200 years of Anglo-French history? Why was it important to you to bring these kingdoms and counties into it?
Yeah, great question. I mean, because I couldn't not do it. I mean, is the answer. As you said, they are vital. Low Countries is absolutely central to this whole thing. This is where the wealth is. The English wool trade, the backbone of their economy is sheep. And that wool trade is all running through the Low Countries. And some pedantic person out there is like, well, not all of it. It was only 90 something percent. Yeah, I know. Okay. But like, this is where the money's really coming in. So every side has something to play for in the Low Countries, including the Low Countries themselves, right? The people of Flanders, like, they have a vested interest in what they want to do with their future. And of course, the Holy Roman Empire, they want a piece of this pie. So everybody wants control of the money and wants the political control that comes with that, right? If I control the wool trade, not only can I buy a lot of stuff, that's cool, but also that gives me these levers to control other parts of Europe. And for England, I mean, it's kind of do or die. If we lose that, what happens to our economy? Especially if we are also in the potential process of losing the wine trade out of Aquitaine, out of Gascony. If we lose both these, like, what do we got now? So this is really kind of an existential threat, and it is inherently fixed on the Low Countries. They really are the pivot for this entire fight. Early on, I actually, when I was thinking about outlines and drafting and like how am I gonna put this together, I had actually tried to build it around simply telling the whole story from the Low Countries. This entire conflict, how about I just tell it from that point of view to really emphasize this importance? Because I truly do think this is the key to the whole thing. I couldn't make that narratively work. I mean, maybe somebody out there is far more skilled than I and can do it. I couldn't make it work because it requires too much, like, leaving the stage to go tell something else to come back. But I tried to, yeah, from the kind of get-go. The Low Countries are always a character in this story because they are. They absolutely are. They're always present. They're always in everybody's mind. And I mean, this is where some of the big drag out stuff happens, is in the Low Countries or coming out of the Low Countries. So yeah, they are phenomenally important. I also, I try to get, a lot of time spent with Scotland and Wales because those are additional fronts in this war. And I said the Iberian Peninsula. I mean, you have to go there for something like the Battle of Nahara. but it's also, that is another piece of the puzzle as the two sides are trying to sort of get supremacy over each other, not just on land, but at sea. The ships of the Iberian Peninsula are a major advantage to one side or the other. And so both want it. And with its own problems of succession, everybody wants to, control that throne as well. So, or thrones, I should say, there's multiple there. I mean, it's all of Western Europe is directly involved in this. The Italian states, the Papal States, very heavily involved in all this. But it spreads beyond that. It's an enormous story, and it was a lot to get into the book. Sorry, it's so long, but it was a lot longer. It's cut down from what it was. It was a lot longer.
Well, it moves quickly. It doesn't feel long. I just looked at the page count and I was like, wow. But I mean, you couldn't have done it in less, I think. Okay, so as somebody who focuses on military history, I want to come back around to gunpowder for a second, just to give us a comparison. What does somebody fighting on the ground look like in 1292? What do they look like in 1492? Because the actual shape of weapons, armor, everything different. Can you give us a sense of this before I let you go?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
Yeah, I know.
At the start of this, even if you just think about not just the weapons, right, but what people are wearing, we're going to have a lot of mail armor, right? People in chain. We move through plate, and then we're moving towards, what we're going to end up having with Oliver Cromwell and all that kind of jazz. That whole movement is really present here when you get to 1492. At that point, we're well into the War of the Roses and all that good fun. Artillery is an essential part of warfare. Guns are an essential part of warfare. They first show up on the battlefield at the Battle of Crécy. And that's just a couple little guns, and they're noisemakers. They're not meant to mow people down. They're meant to spook horses and stop a French charge, which they probably do. But that's an awful long way from the walls of Constantinople coming down from cannon. That's an awful long way from that kind of thing, from, naval fights with cannon that we're going to end up getting. But it all basically happens in this war. Wars, especially long ones, tend to do this. They tend to enable these massive leaps of technology and how we kill each other, honestly. Mm-hmm. And this one's no different. That itself, of course, has social repercussions, right? Artillery, people have written about this and about how gunpowder kind of changes how you lead, changes leadership structures and military, not just tactics and training, but how things are organized change. Yeah, well, they're starting to deal with that. They're trying to figure all that stuff out because that's the new world. I mean, it's not just the new world of our side of the Atlantic, but it's a new world for how you think about leadership at all. I mean, the Battle of Castillon, the main French leaders are not noblemen. It's the bureaus, Jean Bureau. They make guns and know how to use them. And then at that point, France is like, yeah, you know what? Maybe give these guys a shot. Maybe leadership isn't just who you're born. Maybe it's actually knowing some things and doing stuff with that. Steps towards a meritocracy. Obviously, the French monarchy is not that way itself. That's all good for you all, but I'm king because God made me king. It's a big difference from where we were at the start, where you're a leader because you were born to be a leader kind of thing. So yeah, it is radically reconfigured militarily and politically and all that. So yeah, it's tremendously fun to write about because there's so much that changes.
What's going to happen is you have this big book. It's so thorough and brilliantly written and everything. And you're going to have people being like, you forgot to say this. Right?
Oh, I know. I cut 100,000 words out of this book.
Yeah.
Something like that. I knew my contract was for a certain length and it was like, well, that's not happening. I knew that wasn't happening. I think I was in the middle of Agincourt and I was like, that's not going to happen. We're going to blow that by. But yeah, I was like, I have to finish it. And then I can figure out what I can take out. And yeah, it was something like 100,000 words came out of it because it was just that big. But publishing books can only get so big. So there's a ton of stuff that had to be cut. And it was sad because some of things I love, things I really love. And I know other people would love, but the bigger story's got to be told. So yeah, I know there's going to be people that why didn't you give more detail on this? Like, oh, I would have loved to. I would have loved to.
That's what the book tour is for. Hopefully you have a book tour, right? You can talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Well, people can ask all sorts of questions when they see you for any of your books, because you have a whole bunch of books out as well. Do you want to take a second and tell us what you're doing in the fictional world? Because you also have some great stuff coming out there too.
Yeah, well, so when this book is coming out in October. I don't know when this is airing. Is this airing around then?
Around there, yep.
Okay, so you have this book out. I also write fantasy novels. Probably some historians think I do that all the time. So the third volume of my latest trilogy is now out, Stormborn. That's out and is doing pretty well. I'm pretty excited about that. And then I did years ago, I did a historical fiction alternate history set in the days of the early Roman Empire, Antony and Cleopatra and all that. And it's getting re-released in January with a new title called The Ark and the Empire, with an amazing cover. It's incredible. So really excited about that. And Agincourt just came out in paperback. So that's really fun to have that come out in paperback, because I think it's a good book and more people will read it in paperback than hardback. So I got
congratulations.
Stuff.
Congratulations. This is wonderful. And congratulations on this book, because this is a monumental achievement, having to talk about 200 years of history within such a short book in relative terms. And congratulations on this book. And I know that it's going to spark a lot of discussion. So thanks for coming on and telling us all about it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's awesome.
To find out more about Michael's work, you can visit his website at michaellivingston.com. His new book is Bloody Crowns, A New History of the 100 Years' War. Before we go, here's Peter from medievalist.net to tell us what's on the website. What's going on, Peter?
Hey. Well, this week, we're going to take a look at the favorite foods of medieval Europeans.
Amazing.
And our culinary guide for this is a 15th century cook named Johann of Bockenheim. And he had a great job. He was the papal chef.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in charge of feeding guests and visitors. So he's probably in a good position to know what people from around Europe like to eat.
Yes, that's an amazing job.
Indeed. So he wrote a little work. It had about 80 recipes, and most of them, he says, this is good for Germans or Hungarians or Italians or even the locals.
Mm-hmm.
Cute little recipes. I've got one for you.
Perfect. What have you got?
I've got a recipe for cheese soup. Just really good for you, Danielle.
Yes, because cheese soup is what you want when you're lactose intolerant. All right. What is the cheese soup good for? Who is it good for?
Well, first of all, you have to have fresh cheese, mix it up with some eggs and some saffron and even some other sweet spices. Then you take some fat broth, pour it on it, let it rest until it's ready to eat. And he says it will taste good to the French and English. Ooh,
they can agree on something, and it is cheese soup.
Yeah, that's probably the only thing that they didn't agree on in the 15th century. So he has a lot of soups. He also has it for like different kinds of social classes, like the rich, the poor. He even has one for prostitutes.
Wow. Are you going to tell us what sex workers like to eat?
It was roast almond milk.
Wow. I mean, that's what's going to get all that nutrition into you when you're working hard.
Yeah. So we have that little collection of recipes as well as other sources about medieval favorite foods.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Peter, for stopping by and telling us what's on the website.
Thanks.
Thank you, as always, to all of you for your kind support each week. You're the reason podcasters like Michael and me love to do what we do. And luckily, it's easy to support indie history by sharing, letting the ads play, or by becoming patrons on patreon.com. Patrons can get access to both this podcast and Michael and Kelly's Bow and Blade right on Patreon. So what are you waiting for? Check out patreon.com/medievalists to find out how. For everything from centuries to penitentiaries, follow medievalist.net on Instagram at medievalistnet or Blue Sky at medievalists. You can find me, Danièle Cybulskie, across social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5 Minute Medievalist. And you can find my books at all your favorite bookstores. Our music is by Christian Overton. Thanks for listening, and have yourself an amazing day.